like Jason said, this miracle, the greatest miracle Jesus ever performed outside of resurrection has just happened, as far as the most impressive, raising a man from the dead. In John 12, they actually have a party in his honor, in Jesus' honor, and they invite Lazarus and some other people. They have a dinner party, so you can imagine the conversation around that dinner table with a guy who'd been dead for 4 days, the questions maybe that were asked, or the comments, or I don't know, but it must have been a sight to see, right? And so it says in John 12:17, the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. As you can imagine, that's the kind of thing that, I don't know about you, but I find a good restaurant and I evangelize. We find a good app and we evangelize, right? Don't we?
You should do this. It'll change your life.
Yeah. Even a car wash.
Try this coffee. This is the best thing you've ever had.
This water, it's Oregon water. It's $6 a gallon. People are coming from all over to buy That's another story, isn't it? But they'd heard that he had performed this sign. They went out to meet him. Many people. They'd heard that he'd performed this sign. They went out to meet him. And when the Pharisees who were watching this, the religious leaders of the day, their reaction was, look, this is getting us nowhere. The whole world has gone after him, right? The whole world has gone after him. If you were a politician, this would be your dream come true, wouldn't it? This is what you want. You want influence. You want followers, right? You want 1 million people on your Twitter feed. You want to have access. And the Pharisees here are kind of dismayed because they feel like, man, we are losing something. They won't exactly say what it is, but they realize something has shifted, something has changed. There's like a tipping point, if you will, that has happened, and it's almost like there's no going back. People are going to follow this rabbi now, and they stand to lose because of it.
If you're in charge of Jesus' campaign, you'd be saying, we've got to capitalize on this moment. There's a great buzz going on around you, Jesus. I'm telling you, people just can't get enough of you. What are we going to do next? What's the next platform? Now that you've got everybody's attention, what are you going to do? And what we find, what Jesus does, what he says and does after this is like so many of the things that Jesus does, completely counter to our natural way of thinking, completely opposite of what we would have done in the same situation.
Isn't that crazy? If this would have happened today, he would be on every talk show. He would be invited to every talk show. Everybody in the world would want to interview him. And again, like Jason said, you want to capitalize on this moment of exposure and popularity.
Remember when Sully, that pilot, landed the plane on the
water?
Hudson? And he was in every show after that. He was everywhere. And everyone, and they knew, okay, the next thing to do is write a book. Now's the time, write a book. You'll get people's attention. There's a natural progression that's supposed to take place after this if you're going to capitalize on what takes place. But what we see, again, that he does is very counterintuitive to us.
So Jesus replies in John 12, just a few verses later, his reply to his popularity, to his opportunity. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. You can't imagine I'm sorry, I can't help but pause here and imagine you're one of the 12 disciples that you have left everything to come follow this rabbi. You've sort of hitched your star to this guy, and now you have seen this popularity begin to build after every miracle, and now you have the Lazarus miracle, and the whole world is going after him. So now it's not just the 12 who think he's great, but the whole world thinks he's great. And then Jesus starts talking about, unless a kernel of wheat fall into the ground and die. Be like, no, Jesus. Jesus, no. Don't say that.
I love this because you can see the moment where he loses them. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. They know, he calls himself the Son of Man. Be glorified. Finally, yes, he's going to take glory. He's going to do this. And then seeds why is he talking about seeds
the seeds thing,
again?
Jesus.
We did the seeds thing.
We lose people with the seeds.
Last year, and you explained it to us, but still
they don't get it. Chariots and armies and emperors. Jesus, do the power thing. Come on, do the power thing. Show us. Because we have to understand, we're reading this 2,000 years later. That may not seem significant to us, but it was extremely significant to them. We don't know what it's like to live in an occupied world, for the most part, unless you're from some other country here this morning. Mm-hmm. We live in freedom, and we live in a democracy, more or less, and we can do what we want and say what we want. They lived under the thumb of Roman rule. So they wanted nothing more. Everybody on the street, the men on the street, wanted nothing more than to see the emperor overthrown. And this moment of power and opportunity, and Jesus starts talking about seeds. Mm-hmm. Not armies, seeds.
Seeds and dying.
Whoever serves me must follow me. Anyone who loves his life will lose it. Well, anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for life eternal. Where I am, my servant will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. And now my soul is troubled. And what shall I pray? Watch this. Father, shall I pray? He's asking this question. Father, should I pray, save me from this hour? And then before the Father can answer him, he answers his own prayer. No. It was for this very reason I've come to this hour. Father, he prays now again, glorify your name. And then the only time in all of Scripture where you hear the Father audibly answer his Son's prayer. He prayed other prayers, but this is the only place where he actually answers audibly. A voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. The crowd that was there heard it and said it, thunder. Others said an angel had spoken to him. And Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Because now is the time for judgment on this world, and the prince of this world will be driven out. When I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. He said this to show what kind of death he was going to die.
He's talking about death, and I'm sure in their hearts, like, that's what we've been doing for the last few hundred years. Jews have been dying under occupation over and over again. You're going to rally us around dying? You're going to rally us around hating our life? You think we don't already hate our life? I mean, that's a crazy concept. That is not something you will ever hear right now. The opposite of that is what you hear is, hey man, you just got to love yourself. If you really want to get anywhere, you've got to start by loving yourself. If you can't love yourself, who else can you love? And here's Jesus' radical message to you. You need to hate your life. You need to hate your life. I hear that fairly often. A lot of young people say, I hate my life. It's usually around finals time or something, right? I hate my life. But they don't mean it. They mean they hate what's happening to them, right? I hate my circumstances. I hate the things that are happening around me. And what he's describing here, don't get me wrong. I know hate is a crazy word, and he probably uses it purposefully, shocking us into getting out of this service to self. When we serve ourself, we serve a dictator. Because your appetites will never tell you, that's enough, we can stop now. Your appetites will always ask for more, 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 more. And Jesus is saying, you need to put that in the ground. You need to bury that. If you want to multiply, if you really want to be great, if you ever want to be more than one kernel of wheat, you're going to have to die.
That doesn't sound happy. I mean, honestly, it doesn't sound like think happy thoughts right there. In fact, that sounds unhappy to me. And is that what we're describing here? Just a God who just wants us to just walk around with this morbid introspection of death and so forth? And I don't think so. Hang with us, okay, to the end. In spite of all of this, John would record these words. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still would not believe him. In John 12, it says, this was to fulfill the word of the Lord through Isaiah the prophet. Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And so there's a curious statement in there that John makes from the outside now looking in, saying that in spite of everything, it would seem that the issue was faith. Did they believe even in spite of Jesus' words, in spite of the way the circumstances were beginning to unroll? Now, what happens between 12 and 13 is Jesus sends his disciples on the way because there's a feast that's about to take place that happens every year. It's called the Feast of the Passover. Now, just briefly, the Passover was something that had been celebrated for centuries. And what they were celebrating was their deliverance from being slaves in Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt for 4 centuries, 400 years, longer than our country's been around by quite a bit. They had lived in slavery. God, you know the story, had delivered them by miracles, signs and wonders. Signs and wonders upon a heathen nation of Egypt that was oppressing them. And God brought them out through the Red Sea and a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke and manna falling from heaven and the Red Sea opening up. So they would get together every year in Jerusalem to celebrate this big feast day. And it said, Josephus, the Jewish historian, would record that during that time, somewhere around 200,000 sheep and lamb would be slaughtered for the Passover meal because they were reflecting what had happened the night of the Passover. They killed a lamb, remember the story? They took the blood of that lamb, they put it over the doorposts. They ate that meal with unleavened bread. They ate that meal standing up with their coats wrapped around them, ready to flee Egypt. And they reflected on God's coming deliverance. And so every year since then, God said, I want you to do this with your family. And the father would gather the children around that table. Outside, the lambs had been slaughtered for the meal. Around that table, they would eat with their cloaks tied around them. They would dip unleavened bread in an oil filled with bitter herbs to remind them of their slavery. And at some point in the meal, tradition has it that a child would look up and ask the father, Father, what is the significance of this meal that we are eating? And then the father would recount the story over and over again. Now, if there were 200 and some thousand lambs being slaughtered and there was one for every family, there could have been well over 2 million people in Jerusalem at this particular time that Jesus is going to celebrate the Passover. Well over 2 million people were gathered around the tables celebrating this ancient feast.
And the question asked, what does this mean? The answer is more than just this lamb died so we can have a meal. The blood of the lamb went over the doorpost of the house, and he didn't just die for a meal, he died for their deliverance. To be delivered from the destroyer, to be delivered from slavery, from bondage. So the whole message of this meal, the giant object lesson that an entire nation would do and repeat every year and had been repeating for hundreds and hundreds of years, was taking place again. And the message was again, deliverance. In John 13, we're in chapter 13 now, just in verse 1, it says, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. That phrase, we've seen it several times as we've been reading through John, the phrase, the hour had come, right? Because Jesus is actually on a schedule here. He's listening to the Father, he's listening to his Father, and he's hearing everything that the Father says, and he's obeying every step of the way. And at this point, he knew the hour has come for me to there was an hour for me to raise Lazarus from the dead. There was an hour for me to give a sermon on a mount. There was an hour for me to calm a storm. But now is the hour for me to lay down my life.
But imagine it again through the eyes of the disciples. You're celebrating a Passover meal that basically you've done for many years. Jesus, at the height of his popularity, said the hour has come. They don't know what he's talking about. They're just enjoying the meal with their rabbi, their very popular rabbi. Jesus is having the same supper from the perspective that it's the last time he'll ever be with them. Can you imagine how you'd feel? Imagine how you'd feel with your loved ones if you know this is the last Christmas I'll be with you. This is the last time I'll see you on earth. This is the last time we'll do this together. Man, there would be just this sense of almost take your breath away. You would want them, you'd want to tell them, wouldn't you? Hey, you guys really pay attention here. You guys huddle up, stay close to me. But he doesn't say anything really. He says it, but they don't get it. They truly do not get what is going to happen right there. And the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had put all things under his power, and that he'd come from God, and he was returning to God. So here the drama is unfolding. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, there's something going on here that was very common to them. Everybody would have recognized what was going on. In every Jewish home, if you were wealthy enough, you could afford a servant. And when someone came into your home as a guest, the act of hospitality, the first thing you did was you would wash the dust and the dirt off their feet from the road. And then you would welcome them into the home in clean, bare feet. I don't see that very much. None of you have ever done that have invited me over. But there are certain traditions, right? We do. We turn on the porch light. We light a candle. We set the table. We take their coat as they come in the door. We welcome them. But in this culture, the first act of hospitality was to wash their feet. Now, if you couldn't afford a servant, if you rented a public room, it would come with a servant. That was part of the rental price. But if you couldn't afford a servant in your home or in this private room like they rented, all they would do, the owner or the renter of the room would just leave a basin full of water by the door. And somebody would wash the feet because that's how it worked. You can imagine then, so you're in the room, you've already kind of come and sat down, and everybody knows, man, we are eating with dirty feet. I wonder who's going to wash feet. Peter's like, not me. I'm the next pope. I'm not going to wash these guys' feet. Thomas, the doubter. I'm not even sure this is even valid right now. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm not washing anybody's feet. John, the beloved. Well, I'm the closest to Jesus. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I'm not washing their feet. And they're looking around wondering, who's going to do this task? And all of a sudden, Jesus gets up and takes off his outer garments, half naked, wraps the towel around himself, and bends down and begins to do the dirty work of washing their feet.
Yeah, hierarchy is a big deal. It was a big deal then, really big deal. That's why you see people, in disputes with Jesus, younger brother, older brother, what's fair, what's not fair. And everyone understood in a family who was at the top and who was at the bottom, right? You see this, you read all throughout Scripture, even David, the youngest one, he has to do the dirty work. You take care of the sheep, we're going out to war. That's the way the system worked. But if you're not a family, it's not exactly clear, well, who's the youngest? Who's supposed to serve here? And these guys weren't a family. They were just a bunch of guys. So Luke actually gives us a little insight into their hearts. Like, well, what does it look like to be in this group that doesn't exactly know who's at the top and who's at the bottom? And how do we structure ourselves in hierarchy? Well, he told me what to do, but who's he to tell me what to do? I got here before you. So Luke says this, a dispute arose among them as to which of them was considered the greatest.
It's the same scene, just told from Luke's perspective. Mm-hmm. Same supper.
And Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Describing again, hierarchy, kings. Kings do this kind of stuff. The thing you're describing, the fight you guys are having, this is the way Gentile kings behave. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, the servant. The one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who's at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who's at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. And this would have been exasperated by the fact that every time they sat down, they were supposed to sit roughly in order. The head of the table would have been Jesus. Going around the table from right at his right-hand side to the very end was supposed to be the hierarchy. The top person is there, and then they arrange themselves. Every time they sat down, they arranged themselves in order. He never asked them to do this. This wasn't something that he instituted. This was just the culture of the day.
Man, who is like our God? Study the religions of the world. Just do a casual study of the religions of the world and find one that has a God who washes the feet of his servants. You won't. Study the gods of Hinduism, study the gods of Buddhism, study the God of Islam, and you won't find a God who washes the feet of those he loves. Who is like our God? He comes to Simon Peter, and Simon Peter said, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't realize what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Simon Peter, "you will never wash my feet." And Jesus said, "Well, unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Gives you like this little clue that there's more to this than just the simple washing of your feet. "Lord," then he said, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well, a whole bath." You can see Peter panicking there, right? Oh, sorry, okay, go ahead. Whatever you're doing, I don't understand it, but give me the full, I'm going to pay for the, what do they call that? The deluxe car wash. You know, wax it, undercoating, wheels, everything. I get the $7 one. I'm just cheap, sorry. And the Lord says, "Peter, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is now clean. And you're clean." And then he says, "But not every one of you." Man, at the table was this character named Judas who had already plotted, just waiting for the signal. I'm going to sell him out for 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver, the price of redeeming a slave. If you wanted to buy a slave out of slavery and redeem him to set him free, 30 pieces of silver. He knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, not everyone was clean.
He knows exactly the hour that he's in. So he's not going to just leave it here, but he wants to make sure they understand. So when he'd finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place, and he asked the question, "Do you understand what I've done for you?" That right there, we ought to carry that question around for a while. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" He asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so." Do you hear that? He's not denying who he was. He didn't have to deny who he was. He knew exactly who he was in this moment. He knew that he was sent from the Father. He knew that he was the only begotten Son of God. He knew exactly the power and authority that was his. He knew exactly who he was. He says, "It's right for you to call me those things, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them."
I love that. You know, what Jesus is doing here is, unbeknownst to them, is he's giving them an object lesson that they don't connect. Remember, he says, you will. You don't understand it now, but you will. And they would in just a few days. Because what Jesus was doing was the act of a slave. It says it in Philippians, though being in the form of God, he did not consider equality with God something to be held on to, something to be grasped. But he emptied himself out. He took off his God clothes and took upon himself the form of a servant. So I'm washing people's feet. That's the form of a servant. But then Philippians will tell us, becoming obedient even unto death, death on a cross. The cross was invented by Rome. The crucifixion, the act of execution called the cross, was invented by Rome. And it was invented, first of all, for insurrection among slaves. And then it spilled over into criminals and anybody else the Roman Empire wanted to get rid of. So Jesus is acting out a parable right in front of his disciples. You see what I'm doing? Yes, but we don't understand. Well, I'm acting like a slave would act right now. Yes, we see that, but it doesn't make any sense. I know that. You will one day, soon. And then it would come back to them. Man, he washed our feet. He was crucified like a slave. There's something there for us. And so, the takeaway here this morning is in this last line. We're just going to hit it very quickly. He said, I've set an example for you. I have set an example. I've set a model that you can look to. He said, unless a kernel of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, if it gets low, and Jesus went as low as you could go, if it gets low, and that's not just a flippant statement. Jesus got as low as you could go. You see, because, let's see, if sometimes I've been in meetings where people say, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a pastor. They go, oh, really? Where do you pastor? I say, oh, Church in the Hill. Or I say, I work at Church in the Hill. They say, what do you do? I say, well, I'm a pastor. And they're like, really? They say, well, what kind of pastor are you? I said, well, it's always a painful conversation. I say, well, I don't know, I'm the lead pastor. And they're like, really? And there's something inside of you that kind of wants to pull out your business card and say, yeah. Yeah. Right? Yeah, I'm the lead pastor. You know, as pastors here, we always joke about, hey, no one's above stacking chairs. No one's above picking up a piece of trash or slowing down enough to talk to a child. But there's a lot of people in our world that take offense of that because their position is such that I'm not going to go any lower. All right, maybe I'll go a rung lower. You hear what I'm talking about? I'm talking about range here. You see, for me as a pastor to stop and pick up trash or stack chairs, maybe that's a little humbling, but I'm telling you, it's just a little humbling. But to be the God of the universe and then to stuff yourself into a human body and then to stuff yourself into the Middle East 2,000 years ago and then to stuff yourself into a slave and then to stuff yourself onto a cross, no one has made that leap. No one ever has made that leap, folks. And Jesus said, I'm just doing this as an example to you who will follow me of what this might look like. Well, let's see, where does that come into play? What does my life philosophy look like? What is my philosophy of who I am? What does my business philosophy look like? What does my marriage philosophy look like? What is my attitude towards those who are not like me or not my color or not my country look like? What does my sexuality look like? What does my eating and drinking look like? If at your funeral, which everybody will have one sooner or later, will people say, oh, that guy, man, that guy, all I ever saw he or she do was serve. I just remember them as servants. Or will they say, oh, John, he was a rugged individualist. That sounds funny, but that's really scary. Are people going to remember me as a strong, bold leader, a rugged individualist, carved his own path, entrepreneurial spirit? Or are they going to remember us as, man, I don't remember everything they did, but people are not going to remember much of what you did or what you said, but people are going to remember how you made them feel when they were with you.
There's a couple of pitfalls here. One is this. When we read that first part earlier about the grain of wheat, love your life, hate your life, Bruce rightly says, well, that sounds terrible. Because it just does. So here's the thing. If you're doing it, if you're trying to just put to death the deeds of the flesh, mortify the deeds of the flesh, for the sake of squelching appetites, you'll fail. Because we don't do it just to try to suppress something. We die for somebody. Jesus told his disciples, love them like I have loved you. Same way that I've loved you, I want you to love them. What that looks like is he gave his life away. So the dying, the burial, the seed in the ground, what that actually looks like is me planting myself in someone's life. To do for them what I would rather someone have done for me. And really I wish someone would do this for me, but instead I'm gonna put that to death and I'm gonna do for them. We give so that others can have life. We don't I'm just going to flail my back, I'm just going to hurt, I'm just going to, somehow I'm going to suffer and that's going to make me a better person. That's not the case. That doesn't actually make us a better person. As a matter of fact, it can make us a more prideful person. But when you actually become a servant for others, and you start to serve them, that's when you are following the example of Jesus. The other pitfall here is this: if you're doing it for them, you will eventually stop because they will disappoint you. If you're doing it just for people, there's lots of people that I know who are super motivated by the poor, by their poverty, by the hurting, by the neglected, and that's great. But eventually what you find is just a burnout, because there's not enough thank yous, or nobody ever returned, or nobody ever, just came along and recognized what you've done. You have to do it ultimately because He is worthy, right? So when I see you and I'm serving you, somehow I see past you and I see Jesus. So no matter how many times you disappoint me, no matter how many times you fail me, no matter how many times you take advantage of my service, I'm actually doing it for Jesus, so you can't stop me. This is unstoppable because it's Jesus in me and Jesus through me to the image of Jesus and His worthiness.
This flies in the face of our current culture. This is counterintuitive. This is even confrontational, but in a subversive way. Because you may be sitting here this morning and maybe you're in an industry that doesn't celebrate weakness. Your industry celebrates tough. Your industry celebrates conquering. I don't know what that would be, but I think you know what I'm talking about here this morning. Weakness is seen as just this. Who would move towards weakness? Serving?
Think of the job at your company that nobody wants to do. I've had a lot of manual labor jobs in my past. At one time, I was a garbage man. We'd have to collect roll carts, the big roll carts that you all have, stack them, back when someone had moved, and someone would have to clean them out. Even the garbage men had a hierarchy. Nobody wanted to clean out the roll carts. Nobody.
See, life could always be worse, folks.
I know. Isn't that funny? You think, you're already a garbage man. You won't lower yourself to cleaning up garbage? That's just literally your job. And I remembered God getting a hold of me one day and going, knock it off. Get out there and clean up the roll carts and quit trying to act like you're better than other people. It was a humbling moment for me.
See, in education and wealth and position all work against us. And that's part of our world. I get it. And I'm not, if you have education or wealth or power, I don't think it's necessarily it's not nothing wrong, but you have to recognize it's a liability if you're trying to model the life of Jesus to a lost world. Do we get it? It's a liability. It's something I have to realize is going to resist me, like Peter did. Peter was resisting Jesus because Jesus was interrupting his program. We're going to rule and reign with you, right? And Jesus knows, no, wrong. No, they're going to hound you out of the city because of my name. And it's time for the Christian church to get their minds around that and stop trying to compete and impress a world on a political level or a financial level or some relevant level. We just want to be relevant. We're all nice people, aren't we? Well, that's just not the best use of our time. The best use of our time is to imitate. And this last one here is that he said, listen, if you'll do it, you'll be blessed. You will be blessed. The word blessed there is happy. It's just happy. Happy just sounds so, I don't know, just happy.
That's deep, man.
But Jesus says, you will be happy. How many people today of us are just, I just want to be happier. I just, I'm just so hurt and so broken, so lonely, so broke. I just want to be happy. And Jesus gives us a formula. He says, why don't you look for ways to pick up a towel and make other people happy? No, Jesus. After I'm happy, then I will be able to pick up the towel. And Jesus said, no, I think you might have it backwards. And Jesus, of course, knows best, right?
Just say it one more time. Have you ever met a really happy, self-serving person?
Or someone who's satisfied. You guys,
Right, you just, there's no end to that. I can't get no satisfaction. It's always a little bit, that wasn't supposed to be funny. There's a little bit more. It's always like, if you serve yourself, you serve a bottomless pit of appetite that just never ends. If you meet the needs of others, there is a strange, backward, counterintuitive peace, joy, happiness that you just don't find in other places. And again, it's ultimately why? Because worthy is the lamb that was slain, the whole point of the meal. Worthy is the lamb that was slain to receive the reward of his sufferings.
I want to just leave you with both a warning and an encouragement. A guy by the name of a writer in the last century named A.W. Tozer said, "Theological truth is useless until it is obeyed. The purpose behind all doctrine, behind all teaching, is to secure moral action." And so sometimes we can listen to this and say, man, wasn't that a wonderful message? I think Pastor Jason and Bruce are just these orators that, it's like...
Yeah, that happens all the time. Happy means happy.
In other words, we can take something like this and go out the door and say, you know what, I'm going to buy a towel. And but you can take your towel and go out into a world or go on a missions trip or something and take selfies of yourself so that you get 1,000 likes of you and your towel. I heard this message Sunday, and the first thing I did was I went out and bought a towel. And then I signed up for that Mexico missions trip, and I think they were trying to trick me into working in kids ministry, I'm not sure. And so I signed up for that too. But the danger here, folks, is that is in what Jesus said. He said, "Father, I'm going to take up this towel so that you will be glorified." You see, because as long as I just carry this towel around and not get it too dirty and take plenty of selfies, according to Jesus, you've lost the reward. And happiness will be elusive. You'll try to put into practice saying, okay, that's what I want, that's what I want. Just like a magic lamp, happy, 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 happy. You said, if I got a towel, I'd be happy. And Jesus said, no. He said, if you picked up the towel and you actually got it dirty, he said, that's when it's going to kick in. That's when it's going to click. And there's no imitation. There's no fake serving, because God knows our hearts. I encourage you this morning to, if you're going to buy the towel, that's great. They're on sale this morning outside the sanctuary as you leave.
Oh, we were so close.
But if you're going to get a towel, all around you are going to be the opportunities to get it dirty. I want to say to you this morning, odds are the opportunity to get it dirty, you don't need to sign up for Mexico Missions. It's probably right inside your home. It's probably as close as the person you're married to. Listen, before you go and try to do it overseas, try it with your wife. Try it with your husband. Try it with those that you have broken relationship with.
Someone told me years ago, maybe they stole it from somebody else, I don't know, but they were challenging me to serve in a way I didn't really want to. There were two opportunities. One had me in front, and one had me where no one could see me. And I'll never forget Steve Sizemore saying, if God calls you to be a servant, don't stoop to be a king. And it just blew me away. I'm like, yeah, I'm working in the wrong kingdom perspective here. I'm trying to move up, and Jesus is trying to move me down. I guess we just ask that question. Maybe Bruce gave us some hints at the answers, but where have you been uniquely positioned right now? God has you, not by accident, exactly in the hour that you're in. What hour have you come to? Where are you uniquely positioned to take up the towel and to serve?
As we approach the communion table this morning to take the night that Jesus first served that communion, they didn't understand. 2,000 years later, we have all the history that help us understand exactly what was going on. As you approach the table this morning, would you just ask God, Father, help me, even as I take these elements, to understand what these are really about. When everybody's served, we'll take together.